Hello everyone, you are just joining in the Literary Nook by Fadi and his Fadi. Let's start our today's topic, but before going further, don't forget to subscribe my channel, like the videos and share. Our today's topic is the Victorian age, that is from 1832 till 1900. The Victorian age in English literature begins in second quarter of the 19th century and ended by 1900. Though strictly speaking, the Victorian age ought to correspond with the reign of Queen Victoria, which extended from 1837 to 1901, yet literary movements rarely coincides with the exact year of the royal accession or death. From the year 1798, with the publication of the lyrical ballads, till the year 1820, there was the height of romanticism in England, but after that year, there was a sudden decline. Wordsworth, who after his early effusion of the revolutionary principles had relapsed into the conservatism and positive opposition to the social and political reforms, produced nothing of importance after the publication of his White Doe of Ralston in 1815. Though he lived till 1850, Coleridge wrote no poem of the merit after 1817. Scott was still writing after 1820, but his work lacked the fire and originality of his early years. The romantic poets of the younger generation unfortunately all died young. Keats in 1820, Shelley in 1822, and Byron in 1824. Though the Romantic Age, in the real sense of the term, ended in 1820, the Victorian Age started from 1832 with the passing of the first Reform Act 1832. So the years 1820 and 1832 were the years of the suspended animation in politics. It was a fact that England was fast turning from an agriculture into a manufacturing country, but it was only after the reform of the constitution, which gave right of vote to the new manufacturing centers and gave power to the middle classes, that the way was open for the new experiments in constructive politics. The first Reform Act of 1832 was followed by the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846, which gave an immense advantage to the manufacturing interest, and the second Reform Act of 1867. In the field of literature, also the years of 1820 till 1832 were singularly barren, as has already been pointed out that there was sudden decline of romantic literature from the year 1820. But the new literature of England, called the Victorian literature, started from 1832, when the Tennyson first important volume Poems appeared. The following years saw Carlyle, Sartre, Restaurant, and Dickens' earliest work. Sketches by Bose, the literary career of the Thackeray, began about 1837, and Browning published his dramatic lyrics in 1842. Thus, the Victorian period in literature officially started from 1832. Though the Romantic period ended in 1820 and Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837. The Victorian age is so long and complicated that the great writers who flourished in it are so many that for the sake of convenience it is often divided into two periods, early Victorian period and the later one. The earlier period, which was period of the middle class supremacy and the age of the laissez-faire and trade and of the unrestricted competition, extended from 1832 till 1870. The great writers of the period were Tennyson, Browning, Matthew Arnold, Carlyle, Ruskin, Dickens, and Thackeray. All these poets, novelists, and prose writers from a certain homogeneous group, because in spite of the individual differences, they exhibit the same approach to the visuals or the values. But the later Victorian writers who came into the prominence after 1870, Rosty, Swinburne, Morris, George Eliot, Meredith, Hardy, Newman, and Pater, seems to belong to a different age. In poetry, Rosty, Swinburne, and Morris were the protagonists of the new movement called the pre-rehabilitatist movement, which was followed by the aesthetic movement. In the field of the novel, George Eliot is the pioneer of what is called the modern psychological novel, followed by Meredith and Hardy. In prose, Newman tried to revolutionize the Victorian thought by turning it back to the Catholicism, and Pater came out with this purely aesthetic doctrine of art for art's sake, which was directly opposed to the fundamentally moral approach of the prose writers of the earlier period, Carlyle, Arnold, and Ruskin. Thus, we see a clear demarcation between the two periods of the Victorian literature, the early Victorian period and the later Victorian period. But the difference between the writers of the two periods is more apparent than real. Fundamentally, they belong to the one individualism of rapid industrial development and material expansion, the age of the doubt and pessimism following the new conception of man, which was formulated by science under the name of evolution. All of them were men and women of the marked originality in outlook and character or style, and all of them were in its spirit were its very sphere and critics. All of them were in search of the midst of the rapidly changing times. Most of them favored the return to the precision in form, the beauty with the limits of reason, and to value which had received the stamp of elements of thought. But from another point of view, the Victorian age in English literature was a continuation of the Romantic one, because the Romantic age came to a sudden and unnatural, and mainly on account of the premature deaths of Baron Shelley and Keats. If they had lived together, the age of Romanticism would have extended further. But after their death, the coherent inspiration of the Romanticism disintegrated into separate lines of the development, just as in the 17th century, the single inspiration of the Renaissance broke into different schools. The result was that the spirit of Romanticism continued to influence the innermost consciousness of Victorian age, and its influence is clearly visible on Tennyson, Browning, Arnold, Dickens, Thackeray, Ruskin, Meredith, Swinburne, Rosti, and others. There was also another reason for the continuation of the Romanticism in Victorian age. There is no doubt that the Reform Act set at rest of the political disturbance by satisfying the impatient demand of the middle classes seemed to inaugurate the age of stability. And after the crisis which followed the struggle against the French Revolution and Napoleon, England set about organizing herself with a new view to internal prosperity and progress. Moreover, with the advent to power of a middle class largely imbued with the spirit of Puritanism and accession of the Queen to the throne, an era of the self-restraint and discipline started. The Victorian age, therefore, exhibits a very interesting and complex mixture of two opposing elements, classicism and romanticism. Basically, it was inclined towards classicism on account of its rational approach to the problem of life, a search for balance and stability, deeply moral attitude, but on account of its close proximity to the Romantic revival, sudden end on account of the premature deaths of Baron Shelley and Keats. So the social and economic unrest, disillusionment caused by the industrialization and material prosperity. So the spirit of Romanticism also survived and produced counter currents. That was all for today. Stay connected for more literary note by Ferry signing out.